Welcome to the Formula Bowen F1 Show's 2022 Dutch Grand Prix recap. I'm Jared Borislow, but you can call me J-Bone. Let's get into it, folks. J-Bone! First up, on my Dutch Grand Prix preview episode, I gave you 3 storylines to follow throughout the race weekend. Let's see how those shaped up. The first storyline was, will Max Verstappen win his home Grand Prix and increase his winning streak to 4 straight Grand Prix in the process? And Dutchman Max Verstappen did win the Dutch Grand Prix, much to the enjoyment of tens of thousands of orange-clad Max fanatics. Though, for much of the race, it was looking like it would be Lewis Hamilton's day. I'll talk more later on this episode about what went wrong for Lewis that caused him to be very, very angry with Mercedes over team radio. I kind of wish Lewis had won just because it would be very, very fitting for their rivalry for Lewis to win one race in 2022 and have it be Max's home Grand Prix. Then we can all agree on that. Max Verstappen has now won 4 Grand Prix in a row, the first time any driver has done so since 2020 when Lewis won 5 in a row, and his win total on the season increases to 10. That matches his win total from all of last season. Now, as far as Max's current quests to make single season F1 win history go, Max needs to win 4 of the remaining 7 races to set a new record for most total wins in a single Formula One season, and Max needs to win every race from this weekend's Italian Grand Prix through the Brazilian Grand Prix to set a new record for the most consecutive wins in a single Formula One season. Let's see if he can do it, folks. The second storyline was, will Mercedes or Ferrari have a better Dutch Grand Prix? Even though both teams had less than perfect Dutch Grand Prix, Mercedes clearly had a better race than Ferrari in terms of points scored, strategy, and mistakes made. Carlos Sainz alone had a more chaotic race than Mercedes did as a whole, though he is certainly not the one who should be taking most of the blame for that. Carlos Sainz started off with a nice 12-plus second pit stop because Ferrari mechanics did not have all his tires ready for him when he came in. He then got a 5-second time penalty for an unsafe release from another one of his pit stops, which he claims only happened because of a McLaren mechanic blocking his timely exit. Sainz also narrowly, and I mean narrowly, escaped an additional penalty on the pit straight when there were yellow flags caused by Bottas stopping on the track. Just an overall hectic day for Carlos Sainz, a day he definitely is not going to look back on fondly. Mercedes' decision to get onto the hard tires ended up being the correct one, which is what would have made both Mercedes finish ahead of both Ferraris had Mercedes not decided to go for the win, eventually causing Lewis to drop from P1 to P4, which again, I will be talking about in depth later on this episode, so stay tuned, folks. When it comes to Mercedes versus Ferrari in the battle for P2 in the Constructors, Mercedes are truly looking like they are the superior team right now overall. I'm very excited to watch these two teams battle it out for the rest of the season while Max coasts to his second consecutive World Drivers' Championship. The final storyline was Formula One are testing out some interesting things at Zandvoort this week, and from everything I've seen, both of the tests that they did went very well. I think we'll see future Dutch Grand Prix keep the pit straight DRS activation zone extended onto the turn 14 banked corner, and I also would not be surprised if we saw more fake gravel traps at F1 circuits going forward. Here are some additional storylines that I feel the need to touch on. First up, congrats to Red Bull and Checo Perez for having the fastest pit stop of the season thus far at Zandvoort, clocking in at an incredible 2.09 seconds. They were rewarded for their efforts by having Checo immediately forced to run over one of the Ferrari wheel guns upon his release. So, there you go, Checo. Speaking of pit stops, congrats to McLaren for getting their mechanics extra pit stop experience at the Dutch Grand Prix by way of having Daniel Ricciardo pit 4 times during the race. And finally, all of us Americans wait with bated breath as we await the FIA's decision on whether or not American IndyCar driver Colton Herta will be granted a super license exemption, which would allow him to compete in Formula One next season. Red Bull's Helmut Marko has made it pretty clear that if the FIA do decide to grant the 7-time IndyCar race winner a super license, despite him not meeting the stated qualifications for one, Herta would replace Gasly at AlphaTauri, with Gasly then moving on to Alpine. This would mean that we'd have an American on the grid for the first time since 2015. And while I personally don't think the FIA will grant Herta the exemption because he simply has not met the stated qualifications that they have for achieving a super license, I really hope that they do, because having an American on the grid is going to make this sport even more exciting for all us American F1 fans. This episode of the Formula Bowen F1 Show is sponsored by Wondery's new Formula One podcast, Fast and Loose F1. If you're listening to me talk right now, you're obviously a big Formula One fan, so listen up. I have an awesome F1 podcast recommendation for you, and that's Wondery's new podcast, Fast and Loose F1, hosted by Will Arnett. Will Arnett is one of my favorite actors and comedians of all time. Shouts to Job Bluth. And when I heard he was doing an F1 podcast with 2-time world champion Mika Hakkinen, aka the Flying Finn, I knew I had to give it a listen. And folks, it did not disappoint. On Fast and Loose F1, you'll hear from the top drivers, managers, and team owners to get inside access into the high-stakes drama of the chase to win the world's greatest racing competition. I highly recommend you give this show a listen because I think it'd make a great addition to any Formula One fans' F1 content lineup. Listen to Fast and Loose F1 on Amazon Music or wherever you get your podcasts, or listen ad-free by subscribing to Wondery Plus in the Wondery app. There's a link to Fast and Loose F1 in the description of this episode. It is now time to check in with you all regarding how my 3 bona fide race predictions fared at the Dutch Grand Prix. And folks, things did not go great for me. Little sophomore slump. Went 3 for 3 last time around. Didn't go 3 for 3 this time around, to say the least. My first race prediction was that Max Verstappen would win the Dutch Grand Prix, and ding ding, J-Bone got that one right. J-Bone! I'll let you in on a little secret, folks. I will be probably predicting Max to win every race through the end of the season, unless either he has some crazy penalty or something else crazy happens between now and then. Now, we are all watching a run of form from Max right now that could go down in history as one of the best ever. Max has won 20 of the last 37 races, folks. What an insane run. We are all witnesses. My second race prediction was that Charles Leclerc would finish P2 at the Dutch Grand Prix. And alas, he finished one pedestal lower than that on the podium with his P3 result. Now, in my reasoning for this prediction, I did predict Leclerc's podium drought to end, as well as predicting him to finish P2. Now, I easily could have, and in retrospect should have, just had Leclerc to finish on the podium as my actual prediction, but I clearly got a little too cocky after going 3 for 3 last time around. So that being said, I will be awarding myself a quarter point for this prediction and will not be taking any further questions at this time. My third and final race prediction was that Valtteri Bottas would finish in the top 10 at the Dutch Grand Prix. And folks, he actually finished the race second, as in he was the second driver to finish driving in the race because he DNF'd 53 laps in, 10 laps after Yuki Tsunoda's super weird DNF that I'll get to discussing during the listener voicemails part of this episode. So going 1.25 for 3 on my bona fide race predictions 1 week after going 3 for 3 is less than ideal. I'm embarrassed for myself. I have no excuses except for that Leclerc one I just gave. All I can do now is look ahead to this weekend's Italian Grand Prix, where I'm going to return to form and go 3 for 3 on my bona fide Italian Grand Prix race predictions once more. J-Bone! Next up, it is time to respond to some Dutch Grand Prix themed voicemails left by Formula Bowen F1 show listeners on the Bowen phone. If you're new to the Formula Bowen F1 show, welcome. After every race this season, I do one of these race recap episodes, and a large part of them is me responding to questions, comments, hot takes, and more left by Formula Bowen F1 show listeners and viewers on the Bowen phone, the phone number for which is 1-833-200-0966. And if you live somewhere where it's difficult to make phone calls, I've also created a channel in the Formula Bowen Discord server where you can submit voice memos directly from your phone rather than having to call the hotline number. Check it out via the Discord invite link that I've placed in the description of this episode. Also, just join the Discord. We got like 700 people in there now. F1 chat's popping. Come join. It's fun. So during or after each race, whenever you have an interesting thought, hot take, complaint, or anything else like that, make sure to hit up the Bowen phone or the Formula Bowen Discord for a chance at your voicemail being played on the show. Without further ado, here's the first call.
Hey J-Bone, it's Rayon from Canada. What do you think would have been the ideal strategy for Mercedes? We saw how easily Hamilton got overtaken on the mediums, but he probably would have lost track position if he went for the softs.
It's no secret that Mercedes made a lot of correct calls at the Dutch Grand Prix because at one point they were looking very on to have a double podium finish and potentially even a 1-2 finish. However, bad luck in the form of a terribly timed virtual safety car royally screwed them over and made it advantage Max when, around 10 laps after the virtual safety car, there was another incident that brought out a full safety car. Max went into the pits from P1 for soft tires, and Mercedes responded by going somewhat Ferrari at Silverstone, keeping Lewis out on his mediums for track position and bringing George in for softs to match Max. Max would come out of the pits on soft tires between Lewis on mediums in P1 and George on softs in P3. So that's what Mercedes did do during the Bottas-caused safety car period. As far as what I think Mercedes should have done, I firmly believe that there is not a single strategy decision Mercedes could have made there that would have prevented Max Verstappen from winning the race. A safety car bunches up the field, and with 12 laps left in the race, it doesn't matter whether you have two Mercedes on mediums ahead of Max on softs, one Mercedes on mediums ahead of and one Mercedes on softs behind Max on softs, or two Mercedes on softs behind Max on softs. Max is winning the race because his car is just that much faster. In my opinion, teams are still putting too much of an emphasis on track position over tires because it used to work, but we keep seeing time and time again that this is not such a great idea with this new generation of cars. That being said, if I'm Mercedes, I personally would have focused on maximizing points rather than going for the win, because I'm trying to leapfrog Ferrari in the World Constructors' Championship, so I would have foregone track position and pit both Lewis and George for soft tires, thus essentially resigning myself to a very respectable double podium finish. However, if I was Mercedes and decided to say, screw it all, we are going for the win, even if it's very unlikely because we need a win this season, I'm not pitting Lewis nor George, so that Max has to get by two cars rather than one. Like I said earlier, I still think Max would have won even if Mercedes had done this, but it would have been their only realistic chance at a win, and if you decide to sacrifice certain points in the name of a potential victory, you should go all in, not half in. Next call.
Hey Javon, I was wondering, why does the Dutch Grand Prix, similar to the Belgian Grand Prix, not use the national language and instead have an English title as their Grand Prix name, whereas races like Hungary and Brazil uses their national languages?
This is a super interesting call that sent me down a rabbit hole. So if you aren't aware, every Formula One Grand Prix has both a common name and an official name. The common name is the unofficial, informal name that people use to refer to the race depending on where they're from and what language they're using. For example, in English, the unofficial name for the Dutch Grand Prix is the Dutch Grand Prix, In Spanish, it's El Gran Premio de los Países Bajos, and so on. The official name, on the other hand, is the singular administrative name for the event that appears on the official Formula One calendar. For example, the official name for the race commonly referred to as the Dutch Grand Prix is the Formula One Heineken Dutch Grand Prix 2022. Now, what this caller is pointing out is that while the official names of most Grand Prix are in English, some are in the official language of the host country. For example, while the Formula One Heineken Dutch Grand Prix 2022 is in English, despite the Netherlands' official language being Dutch, this weekend's Formula One Pirelli Gran Premio d'Italia 2022 is in Italian, the official language of Italy. Of this season's 22 Grand Prix, 12 feature an English official name, and 10 feature a non-English official name. Of those 10 non-English official names, 3 are in French, 2 are in Italian, 2 are in Spanish, 1 is in German, 1 is in Hungarian, and 1 is in Portuguese. When it comes to why 10 Grand Prix have official names in a non-English official language of their host country and some others, such as the Belgian Grand Prix, Dutch Grand Prix, and Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, do not, my guess is that it just comes down to the contract agreement Formula One reached with these countries. Formula One operates in English as their standardized language, so my guess is that the name for the event starts off in English going into contract negotiations, and then the host country can negotiate renaming it if they so choose. If anyone has any more information here, call into the Bone phone because I would love to know the full story. Another interesting fact about Formula One Grand Prix official names is that only 3 Grand Prix official names include no sponsor in them this season, and those are the Formula One Grand Prix de Monaco 2022, Formula One Azerbaijan Grand Prix 2022, and Formula One Gran Premio de la Ciudad de Mexico 2022. This episode of the Formula Bone F1 show is brought to you by Felix Gray Glasses, which I'm literally wearing on my face right now. I'm also wearing a fire suit today, which is pretty awesome. But the Felix Gray Glasses are still cooler. The good folks at Felix Gray create effective, research-backed products to improve humans' relationships with technology. It all started 5 years ago when Felix Gray set out to create eyewear that would make it easier and more comfortable for humans to stare at screens, because whether you like it or not, we all live in a digital world now, and that means we are forced to look at screens, and more screens all day long. And the thing about these screens is that they are wreaking havoc on our eyeballs and brains and causing things like eye strain, headaches, and blurry vision. The blue light emitted from these screens is the culprit, and Felix Gray's clear blue light lenses filter 15 times more blue light than other clear lenses do. 9 out of 10 customers experience relief from eye strain, headaches, and/or blurry vision. Along with their popular clear blue light lenses, Felix Gray also has blue light sunglasses and amber blue light glasses available that I also love, and you will too. And every single product from Felix Gray Glasses is insanely high quality and built to last. Felix Gray has both non-prescription and prescription clear and amber blue light lenses available, so there is something for everyone. Check out Felix Gray's full selection at felixgrayglasses.com/fbone, where you'll have access to free shipping, free returns, and free exchanges for a totally risk-free shopping experience. That's FELIXGRAY glasses.com/FBONE. There's a link for that deal in the description of this episode. Next call.
Hey J-Bone, I was wondering, do you believe the whole conspiracy with Alpha Tauri and Yuki Tsunoda, like purposely like sending him out? Because it was pretty beneficial for Max because he stayed in the lead after pitting. Thanks.
I personally believe that there was no foul play here and that the whole weird Yuki situation occurred entirely on its own without any sort of manipulation from Red Bull. Though I do admit the timing and circumstances surrounding Yuki's DNF are so atypical and coincidental that I am not surprised it has many people becoming human versions of the thinking face emoji. And I also must note that the people who have decided to go all in on this conspiracy with purely circumstantial evidence thus far, and then start slandering the name of Red Bull principal strategy engineer Hannah Schmitz, are massive losers. I fully believe that there's nothing wrong with asking questions when something looks fishy to you, If something seems a little off, you are within your right to do your own research on the matter and come up with your own hypothesis based on that research, and not just vibes and bias. And always remember that just because you want a Formula One conspiracy theory to be true doesn't mean that it actually is true. So like with everything else in life, just use good judgment and be a good person. That's it for today's episode of the Formula Bone F1 show. If you enjoyed the show and want to help me out, I'd really appreciate it if you could toss me a comment, like, subscription, rating, review, or any other form of engagement on whatever platform you're on right now, so that said platform and its algorithm like J-Bone more. I respond to many of the YouTube comments on my video episodes, so leave a comment and I might respond to it. Speaking of YouTube, if you join the Noti Gang by ringing that bell and turning on all Formula Bone YouTube notifications, I'd really appreciate it, folks. Between now and my Italian Grand Prix preview episode, you can stay engaged with the Formula Bone brand by joining 700 members of the Bone Brigade in the Formula Bone Discord server via the invite link in the description of this episode, and by following me on all social media at Formula Bone and at my real name, Jared Borislow. That's at JaredBorislow. Until next time, folks, J-Bone!